The Obsidian Council chamber of the Krill Imperium spanned a curvature that dwarfed terrestrial notions of architecture, a cavernous space where starlight, filtered through millennia of engineered crystal matrices, cast fractured, somber shadows across the obsidian plinths where the High Sovereigns sat. The air, recycled through biofilters humming at a frequency just beneath sentient hearing, carried the metallic tang of ozone and deep, entrenched anxiety. A holographic rendering of the outer rim, the newly breached sector designated Periphery X9, pulsed ominously at the chamber's nexus, detailing the unsettling trajectory of the anomaly designated humanity. The silence was not one of reverence, but of deep, systemic paralysis, a state the Krill, whose civilization prided itself on predictable order and calculated dominance, had not experienced in cycles beyond memory. Sovereign Thrak, his carapace the color of aged hematite, leaned forward, the subtle friction of his articulated limbs against the plinth the only sound breaking the oppressive quiet. His multifaceted eyes, typically registering data streams with cold dispassion, flickered with genuine disquiet as he addressed the assembled delegates of the 12 great houses. The reports are unanimous, yet utterly incomprehensible, Thrak's voice resonated, a low, guttural vibration carefully modulated by his cranial implant to convey authority rather than panic. They bypassed the established quarantine markers designed to deter even the most determined rogue fleets of the Vorn hegemony, with what our sensors register as an absurdly small vessel. Its energy signature is negligible, its shielding seemingly rudimentary, yet it passed the threshold of the Cygnus null field without registering even a ripple of disruption. We monitor the accretion disk of the nearest dwarf star. That object, the arc, seems to ignore the fundamental laws of kinetic inertia as we understand them. The fear clotting the air was palpable, a psychological contagion spreading from the oldest, most tradition-bound members of the council towards the younger, more adaptable houses. Humanity had arrived not as a conquest, not as a refugee wave, but as a single, defiant speck in the void where established order dictated absolute emptiness. Elder Sorin of the Lore Keepers, whose tenure spanned the integration of the 3 largest fringe colonies, adjusted the crystalline filaments woven into his ceremonial robes. Sovereign, we must emphasize the philosophical implications of this anomaly. Our xenological matrices predicted that any species capable of traversing interdimensional strata, even minimally, would possess the macroscopic indicators of stability, massive fleet infrastructure, energy projection exceeding 4 terawatts baseline, cultural uniformity of intent. This human vector possesses none of these. They project weakness, technological infancy by our metrics, yet they possess a breach capacity that renders our most sophisticated defensive layering obsolete. It is either profound deception or a complete restructuring of the physics upon which our entire strategic doctrine rests. Sorin paused, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial rasp audible only to the immediate circle. And deception of this scale implies malice beyond our comprehension. The reaction from the diplomatic corps was immediate and sharp. Representative Vex of the Trade Conclave slammed a manipulative appendage onto the arm of his seat. Malice, Lore Keeper, or desperation, they are an emergent species from a low-tier galactic arm. Their evolutionary pathway suggests high volatility and resource cannibalism. They likely stumbled upon a remnant technology, a broken gate, and lashed out blindly. Our priority must be containment, isolation, and comprehensive data acquisition. We cannot allow this unpredictable element to destabilize the negotiated peace with the Xylo's dominion simply because of an anomalous entry point. Vex represented the faction clinging desperately to the illusion of Krill hegemony, unwilling to admit that the established hierarchy could be threatened by something so profoundly un-Krill. Thrak considered the arguments, the internal processing of his neural cluster running thousands of potential outcomes per nanosecond. The Krill system was built upon the premise that threat vectors could be categorized, quantified, and met with proportional, overwhelming force. Humanity offered no category. Their initial hails, a series of high-frequency electromagnetic bursts translated by preliminary decryption algorithms, were not threats, nor demands for surrender, but complex mathematical proofs interspersed with oddly structured lyrical narratives about a concept they termed freedom. It was the language of philosophers, not conquerors. "We have dispatched a probe contingent designated Observation Group Delta," Thrak announced, projecting the data feed onto the chamber nexus, replacing The map of Periphery X9 with a high-resolution sensor sweep of the single human vessel. The Ark, it was small, sleek, disturbingly asymmetrical, bearing scorch marks that seemed deliberate rather than accidental. It floated in the void, inert, apparently powered down, yet radiating an unsettling stability. Delta is reporting no discernible internal structure consistent with biological habitation, no life support signatures, no thermal regulation fluctuations. It appears to be a husk, yet it remains responsive to our low-level telemetry pings. A sharp, high-pitched wave of distress rippled through the chamber as the representative from the military oversight, a species known for their rigid adherence to martial hierarchy, projected a simulation. The simulation displayed a theoretical engagement. If the Ark were hostile, even with the combined might of the Krill home fleet held in reserve, the necessary energy expenditure to neutralize it, based solely on its inexplicable ability to bypass the null field, was calculated to be catastrophic to the regional infrastructure. The very act of fighting them seemed exponentially risky. They present an equation we cannot solve, Thrak conceded, the admission grating against the foundations of Krill imperial pride. Their arrival coincided precisely with the period of heightened external pressure from the Raxian cartel incursions into the Perseus Veil. Coincidence is statistically improbable at this level of cosmic alignment. Therefore, we must consider the possibility that humanity is not a threat to us, but an external reaction to a threat we have yet to perceive. This concept, that the Krill, the apex civilization of this spiral arm, were merely players in a larger, unacknowledged cosmic game, was a terrifying proposition. It forced introspection, a sudden, unwelcome peering into the deep reservoirs of their own potential obsolescence. For cycles, the Krill had defined themselves by controlling the known variables. Humanity, arriving silently in a miniature ship, had introduced an absolute unknown. The decision was agonizingly slow, marinated in political maneuvering and existential dread. Finally, the Council voted, the psychic consensus leaning heavily towards caution. Diplomacy was mandated, but not the usual Krill diplomacy, no veiled threats, no overwhelming displays of force. They required an audience, a formal parley. The transmission was finalized, directed towards the silent, defiant vessel drifting near the null field boundary. The message was formal, steeped in ancient Krill protocols designed to convey immense respect while maintaining implicit superiority. Vessel designated Ark. We are the stewards of the Krill Imperium. Your unauthorized traversal of secured space is noted. We request immediate clarification of intent. Noncompliance will be interpreted as an act of aggression against sovereign territories. For 3 Krill rotations, a period of near-absolute stillness in the chamber, there was no response. The tension thickened, pressing down on the sovereigns like gravitational stress. Vex began mobilizing his economic blockades, preparing for a silent war of attrition, convinced that the silence was a prelude to technological sabotage. Then the answer came. It was not a burst of encrypted data, nor a defensive posture shift. It was a single, clean, perfectly modulated audiovisual transmission originating directly from the Ark. The display flickered to life on the central nexus, overriding the sensor sweeps. The image resolved. It was not a creature of scales, chitin, or shimmering energy. It was 2 bipedal entities, standing calmly in a space that seemed devoid of the usual complex atmospheric regulation required by most sentient life forms. They were slender, fragile-looking, clad in simple, functional suits of matte gray material. Their faces were startlingly smooth, lacking pronounced cranial ridges or complex sensory organs evident on Krill physiology. Their most striking feature was their eyes. Wide, deep pools of brown and blue that seemed to absorb the artificial light of the chamber without reflecting arrogance or fear. One of the humans raised a hand, a gesture that conveyed simplicity, openness. The accompanying translation software, a relic recovered from a long-dead species and repurposed by the Krill xenolinguists, rendered the human's speech into the precise, tonal language of the Imperium. We acknowledge your communication, sovereigns of the Krill Imperium. We are not aggressors. We are respondents. We apologize for the abrupt nature of our arrival. The protocols we follow prioritize minimal energy expenditure in contested zones. Our intent is singular, to establish dialogue regarding the whisper. The chamber erupted, not in shouting, but in a wave of sharp, disbelieving mental projections. The whisper. What ancient secret or localized phenomenon could warrant such a perilous journey? Thrak silenced the outcry with a gesture of absolute authority. He focused entirely on the human entity speaking. The whisper is not a recognized threat vector. We detect no unusual stellar phenomena, no migratory patterns of known hostile entities in the immediate region. Be specific, human. What danger prompts this violation? The second human stepped slightly forward. Her expression, even filtered through the alien optics, seemed to carry immense gravity. Sovereigns, we understand your parameters are bounded by observable local phenomena. We are here because we perceive something beyond the observable spectrum. We arrived via a path intentionally veiled from casual detection because the beings who constructed that path are not yet ready to know that we exist. The whisper is not a stellar event. It is an architectural signature, a beacon placed during the galactic dark age, now reactivating, and it targets systems based on a specific observable metric, technological homogeneity. The atmosphere shifted again, the fear morphing into a colder, more intellectual dread. Technological homogeneity. The Krill Imperium, in its rigid adherence to standardized methodologies for FTL travel, resource management, and military doctrine, was, by this alien definition, a perfect visible target. They had achieved stability by eliminating variation, and that very act had rendered them conspicuous to an older, unseen predator. This is speculative mysticism, Vex projected acidly, his data projections showing contradictory readings on the Ark's minimal internal power output. We require tangible proof of this so-called threat, beyond the philosophical riddles of your short-lived species. The first human smiled, a subtle upturning of the lips that baffled the Krill. It was not mockery nor triumph, but a form of quiet confirmation. Proof, Representative Vex, requires shared context. We do not offer prophecies, we offer history. Our vessel, the Dauntless, contains observational data spanning 300,000 of your solar cycles, documented interactions with entities that preceded the founding of your current hegemony. We bypassed your defenses not through brute force, but because we understood the intent of the null field's resonant frequency. It was designed to deter large, predictable incursions. It was not designed to stop something that moves like a ripple across a still pool. Thrak felt a cold sense of recognition pierce through his empirical defenses. The Krill null field was based on repelling massive energy concentrations. It was a blunt instrument applied to a complex problem. If this small, unassuming ship had analyzed the field's foundational physics, it implied a depth of theoretical understanding far surpassing Krill expertise in localized defense theory. You claim to understand the architecture of the ancient barriers, Thrak stated slowly, his voice regaining its gravitas, now channeled through respect for potential, rather than disdain for the unknown. If this is true, then your arrival is not a violation but a preemptive warning. State your terms for alliance. The second human nodded, her demeanor shifting to one of profound seriousness. Our terms are simple, sovereigns. We offer access to our understanding of transspatial dynamics and predictive modeling regarding the source of the whisper. In exchange, we require immediate, unimpeded access to your primary astronomical archives detailing the period immediately following the Great Collapse, specifically concerning the early exploratory probes launched beyond the galactic core. We suspect the whisper's reactivation signature correlates directly with artifacts your civilization dismissed as meaningless debris. The proposition was staggering in its symmetry. The humans offered defense against an existential threat in exchange for data that the Krill considered archaic, unverified, and politically irrelevant, the footnotes of their ascent. The internal political struggle within the Council was immediate and fierce, a silent storm of competing interests and deep-seated paranoia. Vex argued vehemently against yielding any classified data, citing potential vulnerabilities to the Raxian cartel. The military faction demanded a hostage exchange, a clear demarcation of intent beyond words. Thrak overruled them both. We accept the terms, human delegation. Your caution regarding detection explains your isolation. You operate on a scale of threat assessment we have not needed to engage since the age of fragmentation. We will grant access to the archives. But there is a necessary prerequisite for trust. We require a demonstration of capability that justifies the level of secrecy you employ. The human who had spoken first, his name, transmitted subtly through a passive data burst, was Elias, inclined his head slightly. Demonstration is necessary for true collaboration. We understand the fear of the unknown payload carried by our vessel. We will not employ offensive measures. Instead, we for a demonstration of our management of energy, which directly relates to your current defensive shortcomings. Ilias turned to his companion, uttering a short phrase in his native tongue, a sound that possessed a cadence utterly alien yet strangely melodic. The companion activated a console embedded in the wall of the Dauntless. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship's exterior, previously matte gray and unremarkable, began to ripple. It did not glow. Rather, it seemed to absorb the ambient starlight, becoming an absence of light against the backdrop of the void. Then the shift occurred. Projected onto the Krill Nexus, the sensor data regarding the Dauntless abruptly stabilized, then changed radically. The energy reading, previously registered as negligible, spiked briefly, not outward in an explosion, but inward. The ship appeared to compress its own energy signature into an infinitesimal point, a controlled singularity of non-emission. When the signature normalized a moment later, the Krill sensor arrays were registering the vessel as existing at a baseline energy signature even lower than previously calculated. Yet its structural integrity readings had multiplied exponentially. Thrak stared, the analytical core of his mind struggling to reconcile the observation with physics. What was that manifestation? Ilias responded, his voice calm, professional, utterly devoid of triumphalism. That, Sovereigns, is minimal containment field projection, utilizing localized phase shifting. Your null field deters incoming kinetic or energy projectiles by establishing a repulsive energy gradient, a crude solution for crude threats. Our method addresses the fundamental mechanism of interaction. We do not repel the threat. We temporarily edit the local spacetime constants such that the threat cannot physically interact with our structure. We momentarily render ourselves outside the current operational phase of the universe in that localized area. The revelation hit the Krill Council like a physical blow. They did not just possess superior technology, they possessed a superior understanding of reality's framework. The Krill excelled at energy projection. Humans excelled at information manipulation on a universal scale. They did not need massive dreadnoughts because they could make themselves unreachable to dreadnoughts. Elder Soren, the representative of accumulated history, was the first to articulate the psychological shift. We perceived weakness where we should have seen refinement. We saw minimal output where we should have seen perfect efficiency. Your species does not conquer space. It navigates the seams between dimensions. The political paralysis broke, replaced by an urgent, desperate desire for alliance. Vex, the embodiment of economic conservatism, saw the untapped potential of trade routes that defied current warp limitations. The military houses saw defensive capabilities that rendered the Raxian cartel irrelevant overnight. Thrak made the final decision. Humans, your demonstration is acknowledged. We offer you full archival access, unmonitored, effective immediately. We place the combined strategic coordination of the Krill Imperium at your disposal for the duration required to analyze and counter this whisper. We will deploy assets as directed. Ilias nodded once, a gesture of acceptance rather than gratitude. We appreciate your pragmatic approach, Sovereign Thrak. We are now entering the archive download sequence. While that proceeds, we must initiate the deeper scan of the region where the whisper's signal is strongest. It will require close proximity to your primary monitoring stations, Sovereigns. For this phase, we will require a small measure of assistance. Assistance? Thrak queried, wary of any request that implied reliance on Krill infrastructure. Yes, the female human replied. We need one of your long-range surveillance vessels, preferably one with robust passive shielding. We need a platform capable of enduring prolonged exposure to an environment that actively attempts to erase coherent data structures. We will utilize it as a forward observation buoy. We will outfit it with our field emitters, but the physical presence must be native. This was the test, not of their power, but of their willingness to commit a tangible asset to the unknown. Thrak did not hesitate. He designated the Indomitable Will, a heavy scout cruiser famous for surviving an unexpected supernova flare, for the task. The subsequent days blurred into an intense, high-velocity exchange of information that utterly redefined Krill science. The humans, calm and methodical, uploaded entire volumes of historical, sociological, and astrophysical data into the Krill core networks. The humans were not conquerors imposing their will. They were colleagues sharing blueprints for survival. Their history, when revealed, showed a species that had narrowly survived its own technological adolescence, driven by an internal, unyielding ethical framework, a framework that valued the integrity of life above all metrics of efficiency or conquest. They had reached their current state of mastery through relentless self-correction, not through systematic subjugation of rivals. When the indomitable will was remotely fitted with the human stabilization emitters, sleek, crystalline structures that pulsed with that same strange, inward-drawing energy, it was towed cautiously to the edge of the suspected reactivation zone, a region previously deemed magnetically inert. Elias and his companion, still communicating from the Dauntless, now projected their visuals onto a secondary monitor, showing the internal workings of the newly modified Krill vessel. The human interface was elegant, intuitive, lacking the dense layers of regulatory submenus that characterized Krill control systems. Sovereigns, the atmospheric pressure around the indomitable will is increasing exponentially in terms of conceptual entropy, Elias reported. The whisper is beginning its active phase. It is not emitting energy, it is generating silence. Silence in the informational sense, a localized void in the cosmic background radiation where data should exist. Suddenly, the Krill monitor displaying the status of the indomitable will went dark. Not a system failure, not a power loss, but a clean erasure of the data stream. The ship was still physically present on sensor readings, a massive, inert shape against the starfield, but all telemetry, all internal diagnostics vanished. Vex cried out telepathically across the secured channel. It has been erased. The human technology has failed. Elias' voice cut through the panic, steady as deep bedrock. No, Representative Vex, it has succeeded. Observe the external scanners. The main Krill Nexus display shifted back to the raw visual feed of the external environment where the indomitable will floated. The stars surrounding the massive Krill ship appeared warped, not by gravity, but by a geometric distortion, like looking through imperfect glass. And then, the distortion coalesced. It was not a ship. It was a structure of impossible scale, radiating the absolute absence of noise and light. It was vast, architectural, composed of non-Euclidean angles that seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions simultaneously. It was ancient, utterly alien, and clearly artificial, a derelict superstructure, perhaps a massive signal beacon or a shipyard from a forgotten era, now awakened. It dwarfed any construct known to the Krill Imperium. This is the source of the whisper, Elias confirmed, his voice devoid of inflection. It is reacting to organized, predictable technological signatures. It is sweeping the region, eliminating the complexity it perceives as invasive. The Krill Empire, with its unified FTL paths and standardized energy grids, appeared as a perfect, resonant target. Our stabilization emitters have rendered the indomitable will temporarily invisible to this architectural sweep. It now appears to the structure as mere background static. Thrak felt a profound humility. The Krill had spent millennia mastering the known laws of the cosmos, believing themselves near the apex of evolution. Now, faced with the debris of a civilization that engineered reality itself, they understood their place was perhaps closer to the children playing near the foundations of a colossal temple. "And what do you propose now, humans?" Thrak asked, the question stripped of all imperial pretense. "We cannot fight that. Our largest weapon systems would register to it as minor fluctuations in local thermal output." "We do not fight it," the female human stated. "We negotiate with its mechanism. The whisper is a passive defense system, not a conscious entity. It operates on logic gates programmed long ago. Our analysis of your archive data, specifically the records concerning the early attempts to interface with the gamma field anomalies 20,000 cycles past, provided the necessary key sequence." She continued, her voice gaining a compelling momentum. "The creators of this structure utilized a baseline universal constant for their wake-up signal, a constant based on the fundamental periodicity of quantum oscillation. Your ancient probes, which you classified as junk data, registered that oscillation pattern perfectly before their primary sensors failed. We have cross-referenced that pattern with the core mathematical language embedded in the whisper's activation pulse. We can transmit a countersignal." "A countersignal?" Vex was aghast. "You would attempt to communicate with a system that erases complexity." "We will not communicate with it," Elias interjected. "We will communicate through it. We will transmit a message so fundamentally chaotic, so thoroughly devoid of predictable patterns, that the whisper's programming interprets it as noise rather than signal. It will cease its sweep until it can re-establish a clean parameter Basel. Buying us the necessary time to move the region out of its effective range." This was the core revelation of human methodology. When faced with overwhelming power, they did not meet force with force, but force with paradox. They weaponized randomness against order. The Krill granted the humans access to the Dauntless's full communication suite, linking it directly to the human-modified emitters on the indomitable will. The process took several tense hours, as the humans calibrated the signal, a cascade of random numbers, shifting cultural references, and nonlinear equations designed to fry the processing logic of any entity seeking order. As the countdown reached its final moments, Thrak turned to the visual display of the human pair on the secondary monitor. If this fails, humans, the annihilation of the indomitable will and the ensuing informational void will leave our sector undefended against the cartel and potentially reveal our own weakness to the Whisper in a new, perhaps more direct way. Elias met the Sovereign's gaze without flinching. Sovereign, we understand the risk. Our species often finds itself operating in the gap between catastrophe and survival. We have never possessed the luxury of guaranteed victory. We only possess the necessity of effort. The female human nodded gravely. We proceed. On the main nexus, the data counter tracking the Whisper's advance stalled. The overwhelming, silent presence loomed just beyond the indomitable will. Then, Elias initiated the sequence. A burst of energy, invisible to the eye but registered by the Krill systems as a momentary spike in exotic particle emission, shot from the Dauntless, channeled through the Krill vessel. The reaction was instantaneous and violent, though entirely localized to the Whisper structure. The impossible angles of the ancient construct seemed to shudder. The visual distortion around the indomitable will wavered, flickering like a badly tuned projection. Instead of stopping, the structure's perceived field of influence contracted violently, snapping inward upon itself, as if recoiling from a sudden, agonizing philosophical contradiction. The energy signature of the structure, previously in absence, now registered as a massive, confusing overload of chaotic noise, a cosmic sneeze. Then as quickly as it appeared, the structure vanished, not by moving away, but by ceasing to occupy that specific spatial configuration. The background radiation returned to normal. The stars were sharp and clear again. The indomitable will, still physically intact, transmitted full telemetry once more, its internal systems reporting residual energy dampening, but otherwise untouched. A profound, almost religious silence fell over the obsidian council chamber. The Krill sovereigns, who valued predictable dominion above all things, had witnessed an act of controlled, calculated chaos that saved their entire strategic region. You have averted a collapse we did not even know was imminent, Thrak finally breathed, his voice strained with awe. Your civilization, it is built on navigating hazards we cannot even map. We thank you, humans. Elias looked at the Krill sovereign, the expression complex, a mixture of understanding and deep inherited weariness. The threat is neutralized for now, Sovereign. The mechanism is disrupted, but the Whisper was not the ultimate danger we perceived. It was merely the first test, the alarm bell for the actual architects of that structure. The female human stepped forward, gesturing toward the data streams flooding the Krill core from the Dauntless. Sovereigns, while you analyze the history of the collapse, we analyze the composition of the energy used to power the Whisper. It was not derived from standard stellar fusion or zero-point manipulation. It was derived from ambient psychic resonance, harvested and refined over eons. The structure was a listening post, a remote monitoring station deployed by something that utilizes conscious thought as its primary resource. Thrak felt a chill that cut deeper than the void of space. Harvested resonance? You speak of enslavement on a galactic scale. We speak of a civilization that does not wage war with weapons, but with philosophy, Elias confirmed. The Whisper was designed to prune any species that achieved a high degree of internal order, eliminating potential competitors for the harvestable consciousness of the galaxy. Your stability, Krill, made you an ideal crop. Our chaotic signal only bought us time to escape the harvesting range. We did not defeat the system. We merely made ourselves momentarily indigestible. The true horror of humanity's context began to dawn upon the Krill. They were not arrogant conquerors, but a species that had survived precisely because they maintained a dynamic, often volatile internal culture, full of contradiction, argument, and dissent, traits the Krill viewed as weaknesses. Human freedom was not political idealism, it was a necessary evolutionary defense mechanism against galactic predators who favored uniformity. What lies beyond the Whisper's reach? Thrak demanded. What truly awaits us? The humans turned to the central nexus, where the Krill archive data was now flowing in reverse. The humans were sending back their own historical records, the narrative of their own long, brutal ascent. The architects of the Whisper are known in our oldest fragmented myths as the symmetrists, the female human explained. They inhabit the space between the known laws of physics, manipulating causality itself. We fled the primary domain of the symmetrists centuries ago, following a catastrophic failure in our attempts to reason with their central governing logic. We became refugees, but we refused to surrender the principle of self-determination. We built our ships not for power projection, but for maneuverability across conceptual boundaries. Ilias projected a new image onto the Nexus, a detailed, three-dimensional map of a spiral galaxy far beyond the charted territories of the Krill Imperium, rendered in colors that strained the Krill optical receptors. It was a galaxy dominated by impossible, shimmering megastructures, geometric patterns that writhed across entire stellar nurseries. We require your assets now, not to fight the symmetrists. That is a war we have already lost, but to secure an escape route for both our civilizations, Ilias continued, his voice low but resolute. We have tracked a single, faint, stable energy signature emanating from the very edge of the observable universe, beyond the established boundaries of this galactic cluster. It is the only known place where the symmetrist influence appears to be muted, almost entirely absent. Our data suggests it is either a natural cosmic void, or something far more intentional. Thrak stared at the map, recognizing the sheer, terrifying scale of the journey, a voyage that would require the entire organized might of the Krill Imperium, stripped of its arrogance and focused entirely on survival. The alliance was no longer a matter of regional stability. It was a matter of species continuation. You are asking us to abandon our sphere of influence and commit our entire civilization to a flight path dictated by your myths and your chaotic science, Thrak stated, testing the limits of the partnership. We are asking you to recognize that the universe is vastly older and far stranger than your empirical data suggests, the female human corrected gently. We are asking you to trust that a species that values chaotic individuality as a defensive tool is perhaps the only kind capable of surviving an enemy that values absolute order. We did not come here to conquer or to rule. We came here because we heard a distant signal of distress, the potential death cry of a major civilization, and our core ethical matrix demands that we respond. You asked for aid against a danger you could not comprehend. We provided it, using a methodology you could not predict. Now, we offer you salvation from a danger that threatens the very principle of independent thought. Thrak looked around the chamber at the faces of the high sovereigns, Vex, pale and contemplative. Sorin, his ancient mind racing through the historical implications of a universe governed by conscious harvesting. There was no longer any choice, only the path forward offered by the unpredictable humans. The Krill Imperium commits its fleets to the Exodus, Thrak declared, the words resonating with the finality of an oath sworn under the shadow of oblivion. Guide us, humans. Show us the seams in the fabric we never knew existed. Ilias inclined his head, and for the first time since his arrival, a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction crossed his face. We will begin coordination immediately, Sovereign. The final destination requires a cooperative drive matrix unlike any employed before. It demands that we integrate the rigid, powerful efficiency of Krill engineering with the probabilistic manipulation we utilize. It will be a journey of immense challenge, but together we can navigate the darkness that seeks to silence us all. The last image held on the Nexus screen was the two human figures, standing against the backdrop of the terrifying, silent edifice that had almost consumed the Krill. They were small, vulnerable, yet they were the vanguard against an ancient horror, their dangerous ship not a violation, but a lifeboat launched just in time. The galaxy, they realized with chilling certainty, was far larger and far more precarious than they had ever allowed themselves to imagine. The true struggle for survival had only just begun, waged not with plasma cannons, but with the very nature of logic itself.